Hello everyone, I am Eric Alden. Welcome to our Dark History, where we discuss the darkest people, places, and events in human history. Today we're going to be talking about the similarities between The Lion King and the Russian Revolution. So the recent remake was a fantastic movie. Really great. I think they really did it justice. If you want to check that out, you can actually watch it on Amazon. A link to that will be in the description or the show notes. But yeah, it's just really, really good. I couldn't recommend it more. But it's actually really interesting because going back to watch this, I was just honestly going for nostalgia. That's what I was really hoping to get out of this. But what I instead got was really seeing this with the eyes of someone that thinks about politics a lot and philosophy, and there's actually a lot of commentary on life and social conflict and all these different philosophical and psychological concepts that's in the movie. There's so much wisdom in this movie, it is insane. The original writers who put this together are geniuses because there's just so much wisdom in this movie. And I think it actually really especially applies to the Russian Revolution. So we're going to be looking into some of this right here. So let's start by looking at Pride Rock under Mufasa, right? So Mufasa is this really positive leader, and he's really good to the people. There's a lot of really good stuff to him, but under his leadership, it's very much a traditional society, right? So there are rigid hierarchies. You're born into a social class, and whatever you're born into, it's like if you're born a zebra, man, you're a zebra for life. You're not gonna work your way up to become the king or a lion, right? If you're born a lion, you're a lion. And I actually think that's very characteristic of old traditional societies. Now, we've kind of moved away from that, and there's an argument to be made whether or not that's a good or bad thing, but it's definitely present in that, and also pre-revolutionary Russia. Because, right, it was a monarchy, divine right of kings, all these different things, right? Tsar Nicholas II was born to be a czar. He was born to rule. The same way Mufasa was born to rule. The same way that Simba was born to rule. Mufasa actually means king in Swahili, and I think he just does a wonderful job of embodying the benevolent leader, the person who looks out for the genuine well-being of everyone in this society. Not just himself, not just his lions, not just his son. Everyone in society, he wants the best for them. So this really centers around the circle of life. Now, Mufasa is at the top of the hierarchy, right? He is the king. He's the leadership. He guides everyone. He makes the decisions, and it's really up to him. But he kind of humbles himself with this philosophy because he kind of makes the argument that, just because he's the ruler doesn't mean he's any better than anyone else. He's anything more than anything else. He's just being what he was born to be. Right? So the food chain and the hierarchy, right? This is how things have to work. But being somewhere on the hierarchy doesn't necessarily mean you're good or bad or anything else. So Mufasa actually explains to the young Simba in the beginning of the movie, quote, "When we die, our bodies become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass, and in that way, we are all part of the great circle of life." End quote. So when you think of it that way, everyone is connected. We all play our part. The antelope are no better or worse, right? Because when you think about nature, the sun is at the top of everything. So the sun gives energy to the grass, and the grass gives energy to other plants, the animals that eat the plants, and they're eaten by carnivores, right? The lions. So in that way, it's very much egalitarian in some sense. And it's just, I can't help but draw the parallel between the divine right of kings and the hereditary class with the monarchy in Russia and and the way it is in this movie. Like, I almost feel like the people who wrote this are monarchists. I can't help but see it that way. I mean, I don't know. Let me know what you think. So one of the most fascinating characters in this entire movie is the character of Scar, because he embodies so many different elements of human psychology and the negative side of being. He really embodies this spirit of bitterness and weakness. I can't help but draw a parallel between him and the biblical story of Cain and Abel, right? He's the failed brother who kills his older brother who's better than him, right? So he's Mufasa's brother. Mufasa's the king. He's physically stronger, but at least according to Scar, Scar is the smart one, right? Now that kind of comes to light with his Machiavellian personality, always trying to manipulate people, right? He manipulates Simba, tries to get him killed, right? He sends him off to the elephant graveyard. He doesn't show any respect for his brother who is the king. And really, he's just bitter and angry about life. Really. He envies Mufasa. He tries killing Simba, not just that one time, but a couple times throughout the movie. And every single time he fails. Because something that characterizes Scar, as smart as he is, as Machiavellian as he is, he's a failure. He doesn't do what he wants to do. He can't. He can't. And I think he really has this ends justify the means philosophy throughout everything that he does. It doesn't matter that he killed his brother and his nephew to become the king. Like, he was perfectly A-okay with that. Perfectly A-okay. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, pretty crazy stuff. And when you think about it, there's a lot of parallel between him and the communist leadership. Because they were very much of the opinion that, right, the ends justify the means. It doesn't matter if we kill 100,000 people to bring about the communist utopia. That's what has to happen. That's literally what Karl Marx wrote about in the Communist Manifesto. Right? Constant revolution. We gotta kill the ruling class. We gotta kill the bourgeoisie, if that's what it takes to bring about equality, egalitarianism. And in the process of becoming king, he destroys the economy and the prosperity. Everyone suffers, and all the people that formerly made up the Pride Lands, the lions, zebras, giraffes, all the other animals in the kingdom, they're all starving because he used the hyenas. The hyenas come in, they eat everything, and they're just, basically his army of useful idiots. So, Simba, he's a really likable character. I think in both versions, but I think in this version, just look at that picture, right? I'm sorry if you're watching the podcast, but he just, this lion cub looks so cute. I just can't help but love the little guy. So, before Mufasa's death, he just kind of is a symbol of morality of the conformist. Right, so this is an idea from Nietzsche. And the idea basically goes like this. So people who don't really sit down and develop their own idea of morality and their own philosophy of the world, they just conform to, right, society. They just kind of adopt the ideas that everyone around them believes. So if you're born into, if you're born in the Western world, maybe you just kind of adopt the ideas and beliefs of, right, liberalism and freedom and individuality, and then, maybe some Christianity thrown in there. But really, you just kind of conform to the morality of the crowd. You don't really stand on your own principles. You don't stand on your own individual convictions. They're just kind of handed to you, and you pick them up and bear them. And that's really what Simba is at the beginning of this movie. And then comes the hopeless period. So after his father dies and he's banished, he basically goes out to the desert. He's nothing. He's lost. And I actually think that there's a lot of overlap between what he goes through here and the entire story of the communist revolution going back in the Pride Lands. So while everyone else is suffering under communism or equality, right, Scar's rule, he has become a rootless cosmopolitan. He is embracing instant gratification. He is embracing nihilism. He doesn't really believe in anything, right? And I think that there is a lot of this that goes on outside of the communist world. So if you think about it in the way, right? So if we bring it to the communist regime, between, the 1920s and when it collapsed in the 1990s, if you really think about it, he kind of, he goes to like Western Europe, right? He flees the communist utopia in Russia, and then he goes to like, let's say France to just basically become a nihilist. Doesn't really believe in anything, just kind of parties, has fun, does whatever, doesn't really hold any strong convictions. And here's the interesting thing about him. He doesn't actually believe in anything on his own merit. So even after he has rejected the traditional society that he was born into, he doesn't leave that traditional society in any meaningful way. All he really does is live the opposite of that life. So he's born to be a king, to bear the responsibility of the Pride Lands, and he just says, no, and just flips it and says, well, I was born to be a king, well, I'm going to go like mess around and eat some bugs, right? That's just basically what he picks to do. No responsibility. And even when he's in the pursuit of this individuality, he doesn't actually possess any true, authentic individuality. He's still a conformist when it comes to his own morality and lifestyle because, right, he just rejects the old society. It's not until Simone and Pumbaa come along and tell him about, Hakuna Matata, hang out, have a good old time. It doesn't work. And he has fun while the Pride Lands are being decimated. So while Russia is being destroyed, there are genocides, plagues, all the disaster that's going on over there. Western Europe and everywhere else, pretty much prospering. We're having a good old time. I mean, think about America. Everyone's kind of just doing a bunch of LSD, right? I mean, you got to think about it like that. And so his nihilism comes from this radical individualism. Because I think there's a very good argument to be made in favor of individualism as both a principle and something to apply to practical politics. But I also think that it can often lead to people that, become what Simba is. A rootless cosmopolitan, someone that doesn't really stand for anything, someone that just, right, a consumer. So, I mean, think about most people in the Western world today. Do they really stand for anything? I mean, everyone upholds, I'm a great individual, right? Individuality. I am my own person. But most people, they don't really stand for anything outside of that. They just kind of go along with nihilism. There is no meaning. It's a very tough idea to cope with. And I think everyone kind of goes through this kind of phase. I mean, I know I've gone through a nihilistic phase in my life, and I'm sure you have as well. It's tough not to go through this when you struggle with the world. And yeah, I don't think he possesses the intellect to really become an individual, at least in the true authentic self, according to Nietzsche. And I think most people probably fall into that category because, I mean, let's be real. How many of us are really smart enough to sit down and develop our own philosophical and moral concept and outlook of the world? Right? I mean, it's just too difficult. It's just not a practical thing that every person should be expected to do. And that's part of the reason why this traditional society isn't all that bad. It has its problems. There's a rigid hierarchy where people are just kind of born with, for lack of a better word, privilege, right? Lion privilege. They're just kind of born being able to rule everyone. They can do whatever they want. They get to literally devour people that are lower status than them. It has its problems, but it's a necessary evil because this is the way life is. This is the way life is. So, yeah. And so a little more on Simba here. After he has basically spent a good couple of years growing up in the instant gratification Hakuna Matata world, Nala catches up with him and she really just shames him, right? She says, quote, "If you don't do something soon, everyone will starve," end quote. So if he doesn't act up, people are going to die because of the ideas that he has embraced, the life that he has chosen to live. He is the rightful heir to the throne. There is this responsibility. And it's not very long after that, right? Because I think immediately he rejects it. And he just kind of, wants to live his own life and continue eating grub with, all these friends that he's made. But really, he turns back to that traditional society. He turns back to it because deep down on some level, he knew there was something wrong. He knew there was something wrong because he just can't live in nihilism. And I think that actually sheds a lot of light on what's going on in the Western world today. People have embraced nihilism and mindless consumerism and everything else for way too long. People are turning away from it. That's why today, more than ever, more than in recent memory in our political landscape, you are seeing people that openly embrace socialism, people that openly embrace racism and Nazism and fascism and some even communism. More so than ever. And it's because rootless, mindless, consumeristic individualism just doesn't work in its absolute. People are fundamentally connected. If you live your life in complete solitary solitude, right? If you're completely alone, you will go insane. You need other people. Other people play a role in your life. And when you bring it to the societal level, they play a role in your life in so many ways. I mean, let's say you don't even know someone, right? I mean, think about how the economy connects everyone. So when you start a company let's say you go into the software field, you start a new social media site that's an alternative to one of, like the Facebooks, the Instagram, you start a good alternative to those things. And let's say you have success. You are rewarded by society for that. And you also play an important role in everyone's life because you affect their lives. I mean, whatever it is that you do or want to do, you are going to play some kind of role in the lives of people. And when you participate in the free market economy, especially, you are impacting everyone and you are creating wealth. That's what you're doing. And yeah, so unfortunately, individualism doesn't work in the absolute sense. And shortly after Nala visits Simba, he has a vision of his father in the sky where his father tells him, quote, "You have forgotten who you are and so have forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than you have become. Remember who you are. You are my son and the one true king." End quote. The one true king. You need to embrace your destiny, your heritage, the tradition, your lineage. You were born to do something. And it wasn't to hang around and eat bugs and sing Hakuna Matata with a warthog and a meerkat. That is not your destiny. And yeah, so I think Simba isn't necessarily symbolic of any individual person, but more of an ideal returning to society. Because I think with Scar, you can very much make an argument that he's an individual person. You could call Scar Vladimir Lenin. You could call Mufasa even, Tsar Nicholas II. I mean, there's a very strong argument to be made. But Simba, it's really hard to draw him into any individual person because he's just let's return to how things were. This has failed. I mean, you can maybe make an argument that he was like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, where he was just a critic and an enemy of the communist utopia, and he just wants to return to tradition. And he spends at least the later part of his life, really fighting to return to that tradition. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. Now, the hyenas, I think, really shed a lot of light on the way human psychology works as applied to practical politics, because they are the failures of society. And it doesn't necessarily mean financial failures, because most people think of people that are poor and, those are the people that are the losers. And sometimes that is the case, but it's not always. Because sometimes it's people that have mental deficiencies, right? People that are abused as children. If you are abused as a child, you are significantly more likely to be depressed, to be suicidal, to have other kinds of mental illnesses. You have been done a great disservice. And that generally tends to people being part of some kind of dispossessed class, right? Maybe they are financial failures as a result of being abused, because guess what? When you're neglected as a kid, you don't really learn to operate in the free market to provide value to people. No one ever taught you. And then you throw that, right, the lack of guidance on top of the idea that, right, you have probably some trauma. I mean, especially if you were beaten or abused in some other horrible way, there is very much this idea that these people, they just can't do anything in society, right? They're people without social belonging. Now, this is something I've talked about very frequently, and I will continue to talk about this because this is probably the most important idea I've come across in any of my research or philosophizing about any of this. People that turn to radical ideologies, they don't belong anywhere. These are people that are losers or rejects or outcasts. They don't want to embrace whatever radical ideology that is, whether it's communism or fascism of some kind. It's all the same, because they draw from the same pool of people that were abused as children or neglected as children, people that don't have any kind of community, they don't have any sense of individuality. The only thing that these people can meaningfully do with their lives is join some kind of collectivist ideology. And really, those ideologies are always driven by hate. Always driven by hate. And they draw upon these lower classes of people. So the hyenas are representative of the people that were failures during the Russian regime, right? The takers, the consumers, people that they just can't do anything. The lower classes. I mean, and again, I'm not saying this in like a derogatory, negative way. Because sometimes these people, they just legitimately cannot compete or do anything. Maybe they're a cripple. I mean, if you're born blind during the Tsarist regime, I mean, you're having a bad time. Because guess what? The government's not coming to give you any money. If your parents don't take care of you as a blind person, guess what? You're screwed. That, it's like, sucks to suck. And that's not necessarily the way it should be, but, again, we can get into that another time. And here's the really sad part about it. Scar doesn't actually care about the hyenas. He doesn't sympathize with them. He doesn't see their plight and their rejection from the Pride Land society as important. Like, he doesn't care, right? So the hyenas are outcasts. They're kicked out of the Pride Lands, and they're basically relegated to an elephant graveyard. I mean, who wants to hang out in a graveyard? Who wants to live in a graveyard? No one. No one. I mean, look at the prices of houses that are like next to a cemetery. That should tell you how much people really want to live, near a bunch of dead bodies. And the hyenas are just, really, they're kind of pitiful in some ways because most of them are pretty stupid, right? And their relationship with Scar really tells you all you need to know about them. They are useful idiots. Scar sees them as tools, and I think the way he uses them, you can make a good argument that he's a sociopath. Because he takes these people that have a certain amount of baggage, trauma, rejection, right? These are people that are rejected from society, and he goes in and he takes them and he uses them to advance his own personal interests. He uses them to make himself the king. He is bitter and angry and jealous of his brother. He kills his brother and then uses all these hyenas to make sure that he will be the ruler. That is abuse. It's very sick, and it's actually kind of tragic, because in real life, people are hyenas, these useful idiots. So the term was actually coined by Heinrich Schach, who is a German. I don't know if I pronounced that right, probably not, but he identified a useful idiot as, quote, anyone who sacrifices themselves to a narcissist is called a useful idiot, end quote. And that's what Scar is. And that's what every communist dictator has been throughout history. From Lenin, to Stalin, to Pol Pot, to Mao Zedong, to Kim Jong-un. These people are rampant, sadistic narcissists. They don't see people as people. They see them as tools, sociopaths. And they take advantage of the hyenas, right? And especially in Mao's China, they literally, once he got power, he went in and killed the people that put him in power, right? The teachers, the smart people. I mean, there was a point where they were just literally going into schools and killing anyone that had glasses on. Because anyone that's an intellect, right, they might be able to take me out of power. And toward the end of the movie, when Simba defeats Scar actually says, well, I was planning on killing the hyenas anyway. And I'm not sure he was actually ever planning on doing that in the movie, but I think that one line really tells you a lot about communist dictator thinking, because that's what they do in real life. That is literally what they do in real life. They kill the people who put them in power, because the people who put them in power can take them out of power. So, yeah, Scar is communist dictator, and yet it's never really about the hyenas. He has contempt for them, right? And he has this unity with the hyenas because they also hate the lions. So Scar hates the lions because he wasn't, deemed valuable by the tribe. He wasn't made the king. He's jealous, envious, and so that connects him with the hyenas, who hate the lions because they've been cast out of society, right? They are people that can't produce anything, people that are consumers, people that they just need someone else's stuff. People that they just can't do it on their own. And between that and Scar's envy, they are united with this hatred. And when you look, again, this is just the strongest parallel I can see with this movie and communist revolutions. When Vladimir Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky and all these other guys were riling up the people in Russia, what they were doing was they were uniting their own hatred, aligning their own values with the people that were the dispossessed lower classes. The people that were the have-nots in Russian society followed the communist leaders because they were dispossessed. But the communist leaders They didn't really care about the dispossessed. They cared about power. Lenin wanted power. Stalin wanted power. And that's how every communist dictatorship has ever ended up. Bloodshed, massacre, the destruction of the economy. Millions of lives lost. I mean, I don't think the movie really hits on how many people die when everyone's starving, but, right, it tells you a lot that, right, there's no water, there's no food, people are gonna die, right? When Nala tells Simba, people are gonna die if you don't intervene, right? I mean, that you can very much draw the parallel between that and the famine that goes on. People starve to death. I mean, look up the Holodomor genocide that went on in the Soviet Union in the 30s. Up to 12 million Ukrainians starved to death. It's just what happens. It's just what happens. And the really interesting thing about Scar's relationship dynamic with the hyenas is that he knows about their overindulgence. He says, quote, "A hyena's belly is never full," end quote. A hyena's belly is never full. He knows that these people can consume and follow endlessly. They won't ever stop. They won't ever stop being consumers and takers. And the really tragic thing about it is that I'm pretty sure the hyenas know where they lay in society. They know that they can't produce anything. They know that they are just leeches, consumers, scavengers. They know this. And I think it's actually really sad because, I mean, you think about the kind of people that would be a hyena in real life, right? I mean, people are very, very aware of how much value they produce to society, how much they help people, how much good they do. People are very aware of what they do for the world. And when people don't do anything for the world, I mean, it's kind of sad. And I think there's an element to the hyena mentality that they kind of have some level of self-hatred. And that's why they kind of, on some level, I'm sure they know that Scar just sees them as a useful tool. They just kind of go along with it, though, because on some level, they hate themselves. On some level, they hate themselves. No one wants to be a dispossessed member of society. No one wants to be a taker or a leech or a scavenger or anything like that. And it's just kind of sad when people fall into that. It's really sad. But something you got to remember, though, almost without exception today, people can better themselves, right? If someone who falls into this hyena class is alive today, it's pretty easy and practical to be able to move up in the world, to be able to really make something of yourself. I mean, even if you have to do something drastic like join the military, it's a gateway to the middle class to be able to make something of yourself. And in that way, it's kind of like, today it's a lot better for people that fall into the hyena class, but, again. So, the main theme of this entire movie is responsibility. And I think anyone that watches this very obviously knows this, but there's a little bit of nuance here. So, I actually think one of the subtle themes that goes on is the only way for a better future is accepting responsibility for past mistakes. It's not until Simba comes back and accepts that he was the one responsible for his father's death, or at least he thought. That's when he's able to really make a better future. You have to come to terms with the trauma that you go through. You have to be able to look at the bad things that you've done and be able to, you know what, it's okay. It's gonna be okay. I can learn from this and I can move forward from this. It's very important. And I'm a very firm believer that coming to terms with the bad sides of your past on both an individual and societal level is very important and can be a positive thing. So Simba came to terms with the fact that he was responsible for his dad's death. Well, Russia very much has come to terms with the fact that, it was responsible for the gulags and, the countless crimes that went on during the Soviet times. But I also think this lesson applies to every civilization and every individual, right? So, if you're an American, you know about slavery, right? It's one of the most important things we learn about our past because it's like the worst thing that went on in the country. People being owned as property. Now, today we can easily articulate why that's inherently wrong. But there was a big struggle. There was a big debate, right? We fought the biggest war in American history over the issue of slavery. And it's just really crazy to think about. Because it's only after being able to come to terms with slavery that we can, walk into the 20th and the 21st century where America is a world superpower. We came to terms with the sins of our past, and as a reward, we were given superpower status. And I think, it doesn't always happen like that because there are smaller countries and, there are other factors, but I think being able to come to terms with the past really helped. And another really good example is with Germany and World War II, right? Everyone knows about the Third Reich. And, it's normally not in a good connotation, right? People don't look back fondly. So Germany is just, they've come to terms with their past. And I think that they've done good on the negative side. Because I think on some level there is some responsibility that people bear, right? As a civilization, what amount of responsibility can be attributed to that society when things just go completely crazy like that. And, again, life in Germany today is pretty dang good. The German people have been rewarded for all the good that, they did to work to, make up for their terrible past. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think they've done a pretty good job. Now, I think the other sub-theme that goes along with this is that it's our personal duty to reach our individual potential. Now, this is a little bit different than accepting responsibility because Simba was born to be a king. He just kind of bears the responsibility that he was born into. He didn't really choose it or manifest it. He was just born to do it. But I actually think that a more important lesson that comes from this movie is the idea that we need to reach our individual potential. Because you bear responsibility for what goes on in the future. You play a role. Now maybe you won't be a Thomas Jefferson or a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Gandhi or whatever else, right? Most of us probably won't be, but you do have some responsibility in shaping the future because you play a part. You can be the next Thomas Jefferson. You can be the next great leader. But if you don't reach your individual potential, that's on you. That's on you. And if you stand for goodness and justice and morality, then you have a duty. You have a duty to be the best, most formidable, powerful person you can be. And maybe that means accepting your role as the king of the Pride Lands. Or maybe it just means being a giraffe and accepting your place in the natural world. Who's to say? Who's to say? And I actually have thought a lot about this. So society is made up of individuals, right? And it's up to those individuals to reach their full potential and contribute to the world. Because I'm a firm believer that the rigid hierarchies and, I actually really liked Mufasa's outlook on it. He didn't think that he was above anyone because he was the king. He understood and recognized that, right, the antelope provided value. The antelope was an intrinsic part and necessary component to the way civilization operated. And maybe you are an antelope, but that does not mean you have no value or less value. Maybe you're lower down on the food chain, right? I mean, if you're watching this, you're probably middle class. You're probably, right? I mean, if you don't work a job, you are going to starve. You're not born with a trust fund. You're not born into some aristocratic family. You don't have a silver spoon in your mouth. You probably don't. I mean, maybe you do, but feel free to donate if you do have a silver spoon. Feel free, but for most of you, you're probably not a member of the aristocracy, and just because that's true doesn't mean you can't provide value to the world. Individuals who reach their potential. That's the only thing that's ever really changed the world. The only thing, because think about some of the most influential people in history. They have almost, actually I'm not going to say almost always, but oftentimes they come from the lower classes, right? Think about Jesus Christ. One man started the most popular religion on the face of the earth. 2,000 years later, everyone knows who Jesus Christ is. He was a nobody. He was a nobody. A nothing. And yet he had such an impact on the world. Such a positive impact on the world through love and justice. And that's really powerful. It's a really powerful thing. So, just because you're an antelope or a giraffe or a warthog does not mean you cannot have a meaningful and positive impact on society. And I think that's the biggest theme in The Lion King. Just because you're not at the top of the hierarchy does not mean you have no value. You still have a responsibility to live up to your own greatness, not just for your sake, but for the sake of the civilization that you belong to. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed this topic. I absolutely love The Lion King. I can't get over it. It was like my favorite movie as a kid, and being able to watch this new remake of it, oh, it was so good. I mean, visually it was good. It did justice to the original, but it also added a lot, I think. And just being able to see what they can do technologically today, crazy stuff. We live in some very cool times. But anyway, thank you so much for watching all the way through. Definitely feel free to let me know what you think. Feel free to comment, email, tweet. I've got all my social media here, so feel free to reach out. And be sure to subscribe, follow the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on all these other social media sites if you want. And especially check out OurDarkHistory.com. That's where you can find all of my content. That's like the hub, the main base of everything that I do. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.